The moment lasted only a few seconds, but the silence that followed is now echoing across global political circles. During a live exchange, Mark Carney placed a direct and unexpected question in front of Donald Trump, and for a brief, unmistakable moment, the room stopped. No interruption, no immediate response, just a pause. The kind that signals something deeper is unfolding. This is not just another political exchange. It may be a signal, a shift, a moment that could influence how global leadership conversations evolve in the months ahead. Because what happened here is not about a single question. It is about pressure, it is about positioning, and it is about who controls the narrative in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. In the opening seconds of the exchange, everything appeared routine, a standard discussion, measured tones, familiar talking points. But then the dynamic changed. Carney, known for his calculated communication style, stepped outside the expected script. His question was precise, focused, and more importantly, it demanded clarity. Trump, typically quick to respond, did not immediately answer. That pause is what has captured global attention. Now, here is the detail many people are missing. Silence in politics is rarely empty. It often carries meaning. It reflects calculation or hesitation or strategy. And in this case, analysts are beginning to ask a critical question. Was this moment accidental or was it engineered? Because Carney is not a figure who speaks without intent. His background, from central banking to international advisory roles, has shaped a reputation built on timing and precision. When he chooses to press a point, it is rarely spontaneous. And this changes the entire political equation. To understand why this moment matters, we need to step back, because what we witnessed did not begin in that room. It has been building quietly, steadily for months. The relationship between economic leadership and political authority has been shifting. Global markets are no longer reacting only to policy. They are reacting to personalities, signals, and perceived stability. Figures like Carney operate in that space between economics and governance, where influence is subtle but powerful. At the same time, Trump remains one of the most dominant political communicators in modern history. His ability to control attention, redirect conversations, and assert narrative dominance is well established. So when these two figures intersect, the exchange is never just surface level. But this is where the situation becomes more serious. In recent months, there's been growing tension around how economic realities are being framed in political discourse. Inflation pressures, global trade uncertainties, shifting alliances. These are not abstract issues. They are shaping decisions at the highest levels. Carney has repeatedly emphasized the importance of long-term stability over short-term political messaging. His speeches and interviews have carried a consistent undertone that economic credibility must be protected, even when it is politically inconvenient. Trump, on the other hand, has built a political brand that thrives on immediacy, directness, strong positioning. His approach often prioritizes impact in the moment, something that resonates deeply with his audience. These two approaches are fundamentally different. And when they collide, moments like this become inevitable. Because the question Carney asked was not random. It touched on a point that has been quietly debated behind closed doors: how political leadership responds when economic signals begin to conflict with public messaging. It is a sensitive area, one that requires balance, and one that can expose vulnerabilities if not handled carefully. When Carney asked that question, he was not just seeking an answer. He was testing alignment, testing consistency, testing whether the narrative being presented could withstand direct scrutiny. Trump's pause, whether strategic or unplanned, opened a window, a brief one, but enough. Now analysts are examining that moment frame by frame, not just what was said, but what was not said, the body language, the timing, the shift in tone before and after the exchange. Because in high-level political communication, these details matter. And this is where things begin to connect. Over the past year, there has been a noticeable pattern, moments where economic experts and political figures appear aligned publicly, but diverge subtly in tone. Slight differences in emphasis, carefully chosen words that signal more than they state. Carney has been part of that pattern. His messaging has remained consistent, but increasingly direct, less abstract, more pointed. Trump, meanwhile, has maintained a confident and assertive posture, reinforcing his positions with clarity and repetition. So when Carney introduced a question that required a precise and immediate response, it disrupted that balance. And disruption in this context is significant because it forces recalibration, it forces adaptation, and sometimes it reveals underlying tensions that are otherwise hidden. But here is where the situation becomes more complex. The global audience watching this exchange is not uniform. Different regions interpret these moments differently. For some, the pause may appear insignificant. For others, it may signal uncertainty. Markets, in particular, are sensitive to perception. Even brief moments can influence sentiment, and sentiment can influence decisions. This is why analysts are not dismissing what happened. They're studying it carefully because it may indicate a shift in how future interactions between economic authorities and political leaders will unfold. Now, here's the detail many people are missing. Carney's role is not purely political. His influence extends into financial systems, regulatory frameworks, and international economic coordination. When he speaks, his audience includes policymakers, investors, and institutions. Trump's audience, while also global, is more directly political. His communication is designed to connect, to persuade, and to lead. So when Carney addresses Trump in a public setting, it is not just a conversation between two individuals. It is an intersection of two different forms of influence. And that intersection is where pressure builds, because each side understands the stakes, each side understands that perception can shape reality, and each side is aware that moments like this do not go unnoticed. And this changes the entire political equation, because now the question is not just about what was asked, it is about what comes next. Will there be clarification, reinforcement, a shift in tone, or will the moment remain as it is, a brief but powerful signal that something beneath the surface is evolving? लेकिन असली कहानी अभी शुरू होती है. As we move deeper into this situation, it becomes clear that both figures are operating with calculated intent. Carney's approach suggests a long-term perspective, a focus on stability, credibility, and measured response. Trump's approach reflects confidence, control, and an ability to dominate attention. These are not opposing strategies, but they are not identical either. And when they intersect under pressure, the outcome is unpredictable. Now, attention is turning to the broader implications because this was not an isolated exchange. It is part of a larger pattern of interactions where economic and political narratives are beginning to converge and occasionally collide. The question now is whether this moment will influence future engagements. Will questions become sharper? Will responses become more measured? Will the dynamic between economic experts and political leaders shift? But this is where the situation becomes more serious, because behind the visible exchange lies a deeper issue, the challenge of maintaining coherence in a complex global environment. Economic realities are becoming harder to simplify, political messaging is becoming more scrutinized, and audiences are becoming more attentive to inconsistencies. This creates a new kind of pressure, one where every word matters. Every pause matters. Every interaction is analyzed, not just for content, but for meaning. And in that environment, moments like the one we just witnessed take on greater significance. Now, here's the detail many people are missing. Silence can be strategic. It can be a way to avoid missteps, a way to recalibrate in real time, or a way to allow the weight of a question to settle before responding. So the key question is not whether Trump paused. It is why. Was it a calculated decision, a moment of reflection, or a response to an unexpected shift in the conversation? Each possibility carries different implications, and each possibility is now being explored, because in global politics, understanding intent is as important as understanding action. And this changes the entire political equation. So because if this moment reflects a broader shift, if it signals a change in how these interactions are conducted, then it may influence future engagements at the highest levels, not just between these two figures, but across the entire landscape of global leadership. And that is why this moment matters, not because of its duration, but because of its potential impact. As the analysis continues, one thing is becoming clear. This was not just a pause, and it was a signal. And what that signal means is what the world is now trying to understand. As this moment continues to unfold, the focus is no longer limited to the exchange itself. It is now expanding into what that exchange represents and what it could trigger across multiple layers of global decision-making. At the strategic level, this interaction sits at the intersection of political authority and economic credibility. And that intersection has always been delicate. When a figure like Mark Carney introduces a question that challenges clarity, it does more than create a pause. It introduces pressure into a system that depends heavily on confidence. Confidence in global terms is not abstract. It affects markets. It shapes investment flows. It influences how governments communicate policy direction. And when that confidence appears even slightly unsettled, the ripple effects can extend far beyond the original moment. Donald Trump has built a communication style that thrives on certainty. His responses are typically immediate, decisive, and framed to project control. So when that pattern is interrupted, even briefly, it raises questions not just about the response, but about the underlying conditions that led to it. But the real risk may still lie ahead. So because strategic implications are rarely immediate, they develop over time, they emerge as patterns, not isolated incidents. And in this case, analysts are beginning to examine how this moment might influence future interactions between political leadership and economic oversight. One potential implication lies in the recalibration of communication strategies. Political figures may begin to anticipate more direct questioning from economic authorities. That, in turn, could lead to more cautious responses, more measured language, a shift away from spontaneity toward controlled messaging. At the same time, economic figures may feel emboldened if a single question can create such a visible pause. It suggests that there is space, however limited, for more direct engagement, and that possibility changes the dynamic. This is not about confrontation. It is about alignment, about whether political messaging and economic realities can remain synchronized under increasing scrutiny. And this is where the global stakes become clear, because this interaction does not exist in isolation. It is being observed by international institutions, financial organizations, and political leaders across multiple regions. Each of these actors interprets such moments through their own lens. Central banks, for example, operate on credibility. Their effectiveness depends on the perception that their assessments are grounded, consistent, and insulated from short-term political pressures. When a figure like Carney introduces a question that tests political messaging, it resonates within that community. Similarly, global institutions such as International Monetary Fund and World Bank are likely to view this moment as part of a broader pattern, a pattern in which economic concerns are becoming more visible in political discourse. For these institutions, the key issue is stability. They monitor not just policies, but the signals that accompany them. And signals can come in many forms, including pauses. Political leaders in other countries are also watching. For them, this moment may serve as a reference point, a subtle indication of how far economic questioning can go in public settings and how political figures respond when that boundary is tested. But this is where the situation becomes more serious, because beyond political and economic implications, there are legal and structural considerations that are beginning to surface. In many systems, the relationship between economic advisors and political leadership is carefully defined. There are boundaries, expectations, norms that guide how these interactions occur. When those norms are challenged even slightly, it can lead to reassessment. Questions about transparency, about accountability, about the balance between independence and influence. Carney's question, depending on its content and context, may be interpreted as part of a broader effort to reinforce that balance, to ensure that economic realities are not overshadowed by political narratives. Trump's response, or momentary lack of response, may be interpreted in different ways. Some may see it as strategic restraint, others may view it as a sign of the complexity involved in addressing such questions. In real time, now analysts are quietly warning about another possibility, that this moment could signal a shift toward more public testing of political messaging by economic figures. If that trend develops, it could change how information is communicated at the highest levels. Instead of controlled, coordinated messaging, there may be more instances where alignment is tested in real time. That carries both risks and opportunities. On one hand, it could enhance transparency, provide clearer insights into how decisions are being made, allow audiences to see the interaction between economic data and political interpretation. On the other hand, it could introduce volatility, create moments of uncertainty that ripple through markets and institutions. And that brings us to an overlooked investigative angle, one that is not immediately visible, but may be central to understanding what happened. The timing. Moments like this do not occur in a vacuum. They are influenced by context, by what is happening behind the scenes, economic indicators, policy discussions, ongoing negotiations. If we look closely at the timing of this exchange, it aligns with a period of heightened sensitivity around economic messaging. Inflation trends, interest rate expectations, and global trade dynamics are all in flux. Carney, with his background in central banking, would be acutely aware of this context. His question may have been informed by a design to address a specific concern that is not immediately apparent to the broader audience. Trump, similarly, would be operating within that same context, balancing the need to project confidence with the reality of complex and evolving economic conditions. And this changes the entire understanding of the moment, because it suggests that what appeared to be a simple exchange may, in fact, have been part of a larger, more intricate interaction, an interaction shaped by timing, context, and underlying pressures. But there is one final factor that could change everything, and that is how this moment is interpreted moving forward. Because perception in global affairs often becomes reality, if this exchange is seen as a sign of growing tension between economic and political narratives, it could influence how future interactions are conducted. If it is seen as a one-time anomaly, it may fade without lasting impact. But if it is seen as the beginning of a pattern, then its significance increases dramatically. Now, based on current analysis, 3 realistic scenarios are beginning to emerge. The first scenario is stabilization. In this outcome, both sides adjust. Political communication becomes slightly more measured, economic questioning becomes more structured, the balance is restored, and future interactions proceed with greater alignment. This scenario is the least disruptive. It maintains existing frameworks while incorporating lessons from this moment. The second scenario is escalation. Here, the dynamic shifts more noticeably. Economic figures begin to ask more direct questions in public settings. Political figures respond with greater caution, or in some cases, push back more strongly. This creates a more visible tension, not necessarily conflict, but a clearer distinction between economic assessment and political messaging. In this scenario, moments like the one we witnessed become more frequent. And the third scenario is transformation. So in this case, the interaction signals a deeper shift, a redefinition of how economic and political narratives intersect. Public exchanges become more transparent, differences in perspective are more openly acknowledged, audiences gain greater insight into the complexities of decision-making. This scenario carries the highest potential impact because it changes not just the interaction, but the structure of communication itself. But the real risk may still lie ahead, because each of these scenarios depends on how key figures respond in the coming days and weeks. Will there be clarification? Will there be reinforcement of existing positions? Or will there be subtle adjustments that indicate a shift in strategy? These questions remain open, and this is where the global stakes become clearer, because the implications extend beyond any single country or individual. They touch on how leadership is perceived, how decisions are communicated, and how trust is maintained in an increasingly complex environment. As we step back and assess the full picture, one thing becomes evident. This moment, brief as it was, has introduced a new variable into the equation, a variable defined by uncertainty, interpretation, and potential change. It has prompted analysis, not because of what was said, but because of what it may represent. And in that sense, its impact may continue to unfold long after the initial exchange. The future of this situation will not be determined by that single pause. It will be shaped by the responses that follow, by the adjustments that are made, by the signals that are sent, intentionally or otherwise, because in global affairs, meaning is rarely fixed. It evolves, it adapts. It becomes clearer over time, and that is where we are now, at the beginning of a process of interpretation, a process that will determine whether this moment is remembered as a minor deviation or as an early indicator of something more significant. The answer is not yet clear, but the questions it raises are, and they are now part of a broader conversation about the relationship between economic reality and political narrative, a conversation that is likely to continue, a conversation that may shape future interactions at the highest levels, and a conversation that for now leaves us with one central question. Was that brief silence simply a pause in conversation, or the first visible sign of a deeper shift in global leadership dynamics?